Hi everybody, welcome back to Law Hero. My name is Jen and today we are going to talk about the difference between private practice lawyers and in-house lawyers. This is a requested video from one of my viewers on Instagram, so if you're not already following me there, please do. And let's get into it. So firstly, what do I mean by private practice? An in-house lawyer, real quick. Private practice is simply a lawyer who works for a law firm. They're an employee of a law firm, and an in-house lawyer basically means a lawyer who works for public entity like the government or in the Attorney General's office or the Director of Public Prosecutions, which is the public prosecutor in Ireland for criminal law, criminal offences, or you work in private industry like I do, like for example banking, telecommunications, retail, all that kind of stuff. So that's the distinction between private practice and in-house lawyer. Some people can train as a solicitor or a lawyer in a in-house organization, but that is actually very few and far between. I know some of the big telecommunications providers in Ireland do provide some sort of a traineeship. The issue is simply because of the Law Society of Ireland look for certain practice areas as part of your traineeship, like litigation, property law, and some sort of corporate law. You may not get all of those areas in-house, so that's the reason why the majority of people, so like 99% of people, train in private practice. It's because they need the credits in order to become a member of the Law Society of Ireland. That's simply the reason why people train in private practice. So as some of you know, I was in private practice. I trained in private practice in Irish law firm, and I qualified into a banking or a finance seat, and then pretty soon after I qualified, actually maybe 5 or 6 months into qualification, I decided to go in-house. Now I was very young going in-house, and the reason I went in-house was, well, there was lots of reasons actually. First and foremost, I really wanted to see what life was like in-house. I was so curious because, especially as a finance or banking lawyer, your clients are normally banks or financial institutions, and you want to understand what the operations are behind what you're advising on. I found a lot of the time I was advising in a vacuum, as in, okay, I'm giving this bank advice, or we're looking after a transaction for some institution, but I don't really understand why they're doing that. Like, what's the economic rationale for that transaction? And I always felt, as a facilitator, kind of out of the loop from the business side of it. So I thought it would be a good idea to go in-house into some kind of a financial entity, and that's exactly what I did. And it was great. It was really scary, as in you have much more responsibility when you're in-house because you don't really have the kind of support structure, and I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, it was a great decision. The other reason as well was for lifestyle. As some of you already know, I'm really big into sport, and sometimes I train twice a day, and to have that kind of lifestyle in private practice, it's not really feasible. You can be an athlete in private practice, but you can't really get like nationally top level if you're in private practice, simply just because of the hours. So, you know, that's something about private practice. The hours are very long because the business model is based on a billable hours structure, and obviously the more hours you work, the more profitable it is for the law firm. Whereas when you're in in-house, you're normally salaried from like 9 to 5, like a normal worker will be. Okay, so the first area we're going to look at is the type of work you'll be doing. As I've already alluded to, you're quite specialised in private practice. So for example, you might just do finance, but even then it could be quite niche. So it could be like debt capital markets transactions, or just banking transactions, or just derivatives, or just funds. Whereas when you go in-house, you'll be doing all of that stuff, especially if you're working for a bank. And you'll also be doing things like commercial contracts, GDPR, employment law, all that kind of stuff, even some corporate law. So it's a much more broader spectrum of law you'll be practicing, which is great. And actually, you know, sometimes people say, you know, it's very, there's two sides of the coin really. Some people say that when you specialize, you become more valuable, and that is true. The more you know, practice in a certain area, the more valuable you become. But at the same time, I personally think it's nice to have some variety, and I've definitely found that in-house the variety is lovely. I love dabbling between kind of financial regulation, banking law, commercial contracts. I love GDPR. I think if you have a very broad interest in law like I do, in-house will really suit you, and you won't be bored because there'll always be new stuff, and new kind of ways to look at things. So that is one really nice thing. It depends what you want though at the end of the day. The second thing is salary and career progression. So usually, not always, the salary of a private practice lawyer would be higher than an in-house lawyer, simply because they do more hours and it's considered more valuable and specialized. However, there are some in-house counsel, or general counsel as they're sometimes called, who've been in in-house positions for many years, who are on very big salaries. So that's not always the case. Obviously, career progression path in private practice goes from, you know, junior associate, senior associate, partner, or if you're not called for partnership, or you decide you don't want partnership, you could be off counsel. Whereas that's quite different in-house. You may be at the same level for many years, and normally there's only really one head of legal role. Well, actually always. So that's kind of a dead end for a lot of people. But again, it depends on what you want. Do you want to be the head of legal in your organization? That's up to you. And then you kind of have to assess, is that feasible in the long run? How many other people have been in the door before you? Are they in line for the head of legal role? That kind of thing. So you have to decide what you want. Work-life balance, again, as I've already alluded to, private practice is not known for a good work-life balance. Let's not beat around the bush. Some private practice law firms have gotten better at this. They've given, you know, more time off, some more flexible arrangements, working from home, especially with COVID-19. There's also some gyms and things popping up in private practice, but I think on the whole, you can say that work-life balance in private practice, and I mean this for like accounting firms as well, colloquially what I've heard, is not good. Whereas in-house it is pretty good. As I said, you have capped number of hours in a day, set salary, and normally for women who are thinking of having children, it's a much more flexible arrangement, and that's usually what happens. I believe AIB is the company in Ireland with the most female solicitors, and they're known for that. Your client, when you're in-house, is your employer, and that is a quite interesting nuance, whereas obviously when you're in private practice you have a myriad of clients. When your client is your employer, there are some inherent conflicts of interest which arise by nature of the relationship, because sometimes you can be asked to do things which you may see some legal frivolities, but the employer needs it done. So even though your duty of care is to your client, and there's also, you have a mutual trust and confidence relationship with your employer, you can still look for help if you are in a precarious position as a solicitor in-house. Your number one priority is yourself and your practicing cert. Mine is up on the wall, and I like to look at my practicing cert sometimes just to remind myself of what my duties are, and that first and foremost that solicitors are officers of the court. We make sure that justice is done in a transparent and a fair way. So even though you're in-house, you shouldn't be compromised in your role. Finally, the skills of an in-house lawyer are broadly the same as a private practice lawyer, but of course in-house you're dealing with many different departments. So, you know, for example, in banking, we're dealing with operations, treasury, risk, compliance, those kind of things, and you develop kind of interpersonal relationships cross department. Whereas, you know, in private practice, your relationships are based kind of in the law firm. If there's some specialists, you normally have some go-to people, so it's a little bit different like that. And then of course, you will engage external counsel as an in-house lawyer if there's some area of law which you're not familiar with and you think you need some extra comfort, so you go externally for that. I think when you are a in-house lawyer, you definitely have a heightened awareness of commerciality, so commercial awareness. You have far more insight into the business decisions, especially from a management perspective, because you're closer to management, closer to the client. You can kind of understand the economic rationale for decisions, and that's always really what I felt I was missing. And you're kind of more involved in operations and kind of you know, the day-to-day business, which is great. And you normally have a legal team, so there's normally, like, well, in my organization there's 5 of us, and you know, those people were different levels, we have different skills, and it's really nice when we come together and we all kind of divvy out the work between us. And whereas I think in a law firm it's a little bit more hierarchical, you have the junior associates who do kind of the heavy lifting, like the brunt of the hard work, as in like the drafting and whatnot, and then partner will kind of tweak it based on their experience, but they normally drum up business development. That's kind of more their role, the more senior they get. So yeah, I think that is a pretty brief synopsis, but an insightful synopsis of the kind of difference between private practice and in-house lawyer. If you have any other video suggestions, please email me at info@lawhero.eu, and continue to follow me on Instagram at lawheroirl, and see you in the next one.